All right, we could soon know if Camelot actually existed.
Arthur's Stone, a 5,000-year-old chambered tomb in Britain, is being...
What if I told you that the legendary King Arthur's body was finally found? But here is the thing. It was not found in a grand castle, but inside a dark cave. Imagine centuries of songs and stories clashing with a group of scientists scraping out bones they claim belonged to Arthur himself.
He may have been their savior, but the site is also connected to their mythic rock star, King Arthur.
This claim has blown up on YouTube, even landing on Joe Rogan's table, where he, too, asked whether it was finally the real deal. For over 1,500 years, the world wondered if Arthur was just a myth or a lost king waiting to be found. And now, a cave discovery might be the clue we were all waiting for. How much truth is really behind these claims? Let's dig into the history of King Arthur's supposed remains. But first, did medieval monks really find King Arthur's bones? Or was it a masterful medieval marketing ploy? Glastonbury Abbey's discovery. Glastonbury Abbey was not just a holy site, it was a business, and in the year 1991, business was bad. After a fire left the abbey in ruins, the monks needed something big to bring in money. So, when they claimed to have dug up King Arthur's bones, complete with a lead cross and stories of giant remains, people listened. And just like that, a legend became a headline, turning a burned-out abbey into the hottest pilgrimage destination in medieval England. Deep in the abbey grounds, workers uncovered an old oak coffin buried beneath a hollowed-out tree trunk. Inside, they found bones large enough for them to claim they belonged to a giant. And there was a lead cross, scratched with the words in Latin that roughly read, "Here lies the famous King Arthur, buried in the Isle of Avalon." Gerald of Wales, a medieval chronicler who visited the site, described these bones as belonging to a man taller than most, next to the smaller bones of a woman they claimed was Guinevere. To the people of medieval England, who were worn down by endless wars and hungry for legends, it felt like the ultimate confirmation that King Arthur had been real, that he had ruled and died, and that Avalon was not a distant myth, but right there under the wet English sky. But here's what's interesting. Modern scholars, including researchers from Reading University, believe this discovery was one of the greatest PR stunts of the medieval world. The monks needed pilgrims, and pilgrims brought donations, so the timing of this find, just after the fire, looks a lot less like divine providence and more like an early medieval marketing campaign. The bones became an instant sensation, drawing visitors who wanted to see Arthur's resting place, turning Glastonbury into a spiritual hotspot. And the story of Arthur's bones stayed powerful for centuries, until it vanished into the chaos of history. During the reign of Henry VIII, Glastonbury Abbey fell victim to the dissolution of the monasteries, a sweeping purge that stripped abbeys of their treasures and lands. Soldiers and officials stormed the abbey, taking what they could and destroying what they didn't want. In the process, Arthur's supposed bones disappeared forever, swept away into the chaos of England's brutal political transformations. Did you know that the original bones of King Arthur have been missing for almost 500 years? This makes any modern claim about discovering his body in this cave impossible if you're looking for remains tied to Glastonbury. So when you hear Joe Rogan lean forward on the JRE and say, "Man, so they actually found King Arthur's body in a cave. That's wild," you can almost see the fascination in his eyes. In that episode, Rogan talks about the power of myths and how a single discovery can upend centuries of what we think we know. But even he pauses when the reality sets in that these stories often blur into clever tricks and half-true legends designed to keep the gold flowing. Because the truth is, while the monks' discovery made Glastonbury famous, modern archaeology has not found any evidence proving those bones were Arthur's. In fact, it's widely agreed they were remains from a much later period, carefully staged with that lead cross to convince the public, boosting the abbey's prestige and income after the fire left them with empty coffers. It's a reminder that even in the 12th century, people understood the power of branding, of shaping stories, and of using legends to build influence and wealth. The monks at Glastonbury might not have invented the myth of King Arthur, but they knew how to monetize it with a well-timed discovery when their world was falling apart around them. So, the next time you hear someone claim they have found the real King Arthur's remains, remember that the first people to do so were probably just trying to save their crumbling abbey from financial ruin, armed with a lead cross and the bones of someone whose name has been lost to time. And just like that, a story that felt like hope to thousands of medieval pilgrims becomes a reminder that even the greatest legends can be carefully crafted illusions when money and power are at stake. But suppose the bones at Glastonbury were just a well-played illusion. In that case, it leaves one big question hanging in the air. Apart from Glastonbury, where else have people claimed to find Arthur's remains? King Arthur's Cave, Herefordshire. King Arthur's Cave in Herefordshire, England, sounds like something out of a bedtime story. But it is a real place. Tucked along the Wye Valley, near the English-Welsh border, the cave became famous in the 17th century. For over 250 years, rumours have echoed through its chambers, claiming it was the final resting place of King Arthur himself. Local stories back then spoke about a giant skeleton being found inside, so large it was supposedly shipped off to Jamaica for display. These stories grew over time, gaining momentum like all Arthurian tales do, blending half-facts with hopes people never wanted to give up. But what actually happened when people decided to check? In 1871, a team of Victorian explorers rolled up to the cave with a wagon, picks, and a hunger for discovery. The team included members of the University of Bristol Speleological Society, one of the oldest cave science groups in the country, determined to get to the bottom of the Arthur legend. They began excavating layer by layer, pulling out bones, tools, and pieces of history, one handful of dirt at a time. Their goal was clear. If King Arthur's bones were there, they were going to find them. They found bones, just not the kind of people they were expecting. Inside the cave, they uncovered the remains of hyenas, woolly rhinoceroses, reindeer, and other Ice Age creatures that had roamed Britain over 12,000 years ago. Alongside these ancient bones were Paleolithic tools and artifacts, the signatures of human presence that dated back to a time long before King Arthur's supposed reign in the Dark Ages. But there were no human skeletons from Arthur's time, no giant remains, and definitely no lead cross declaring a king's burial site. As the excavation continued, it became increasingly clear that the cave was a time capsule of Britain's deep prehistoric past, but it was silent about Arthur. The Victorian explorers documented their finds with diagrams and detailed notes, some of which you can still read in the University of Bristol's archived reports. Each artifact was another nail in the coffin of the legend, proving that while King Arthur's Cave was a place of stories, it was not a tomb for a fallen king. And about that myth of the giant skeleton being shipped off to Jamaica. It is just that, a myth. There is no record, no documentation, and no crate arrives in Kingston with the bones of a supposed Arthur inside. This is folklore at its finest, a story designed to add spice to local legends, retold until it feels real, but dissolving under the weight of actual evidence. Modern cave science backs this up completely. Speleologists and archaeologists have returned to King Arthur's Cave with modern equipment, ground-penetrating radar, and updated excavation methods, confirming what the Victorians found. The cave is an important archaeological site for understanding Britain's Ice Age past, but it holds no secrets about Arthur, no hidden remains or evidence that the legendary king ever set foot inside those limestone chambers. It is not just academics who are fascinated by this cave story. Joe Rogan brought up King Arthur's Cave on the JRE, shaking his head with that mix of curiosity and skepticism he is known for, asking whether these kinds of claims ever hold up when you get real archaeologists on the ground. You can almost hear the pause in his voice when he realizes the cave is full of woolly rhino bones instead of a king's remains, highlighting how easily legends can grow around a place simply because people want them to. This is what makes King Arthur's Cave so interesting. It is a perfect case study in how stories and science collide. A place wrapped in legend, tested by excavation, and revealed for what it really is: a prehistoric archive, not a royal crypt. It teaches us how folklore can grow around a site, how people crave mysteries that feel real, and how actual evidence can turn legends into learning opportunities instead of dead ends. While caves might disappoint when it comes to the quest for Arthur's bones, they still tell stories worth hearing. But if Arthur is not in Glastonbury Abbey, and he is not hiding in King Arthur's cave, then where else could people be looking? And while caves disappoint, what about the famous Arthur's stone? Could that be the real deal? Arthur's stone. Arthur's stone sits quietly on a Herefordshire hill, massive stone slabs stacked with the weight of deep time. It looks like the kind of place a king might rest, the wind moving through tall grass, shadows stretching across the capstone that weighs around 25 tons. For centuries, stories claimed this was where Arthur struck down a giant, leaving the grooves on the rock as proof. By the 13th century, it had become tangled in folklore, a landmark people had pointed to and whispered about on their way past. In 2022 and 2023, archaeologists from the University of Manchester dug into the soil around Arthur's stone, hoping to learn what lay beneath the legends. They found cremated human remains, but these remains came from Neolithic communities who lived and died thousands of years before any Arthurian knight ever lifted a sword. The site turned out to be a multi-phase monument, expanded and used over generations long before the 6th century. Stone tools, hearths, and burial pits told stories of ancient communities who gathered, mourned, and built this place as a ritual landscape, not a royal tomb. Yet, despite the clear timeline, headlines still floated around claiming a connection to King Arthur, feeding that hunger for a lost grave of Britain's legendary ruler. Media outlets splashed images of the monument alongside Arthur's name, implying the mystery had finally cracked open. But when you look closely, there is no sword, no knight's body, and no lead cross with Arthur's name hidden under these stones. Even on the JRE, Joe Rogan leaned in, curious as always, saying how people want to believe there is a place where the story becomes real, where the myth and the dirt finally match up. But Arthur's stone is not that place, no matter how much we wish it could be. If physical remains continue to elude us, what about the man behind the myth? What does Joe Rogan say about the legend itself? And why does the world keep searching for the real King Arthur, even when the evidence slips through our fingers? Joe Rogan's take on the myth. When people hear about a 5,700-year-old monument like Arthur's stone, or a cave where someone claims to have found Arthur's remains, they lean in. It is like the possibility of pulling Excalibur from the mud, that chance to prove a myth real for just a moment. However, during the Joe Rogan Experience in 2019, Joe paused during a conversation about legends and said something that cut through the noise. He said, "It is not about finding a skeleton and saying, 'This is Arthur.' It is about what Arthur represents." Joe explained how the Arthurian stories work like a map to help you become who you are meant to be. He brought up Joseph Campbell, the scholar who outlined the hero's journey, and connected it to how Arthur is the figure who takes up the sword, gathers the knights, builds a kingdom, and then has it tested. Arthur is not just a man in these stories, Joe said, but the version of yourself that shows up when everything is on the line. It is the call you feel when you know you are meant to build something, fix something, and face the unknown with courage you did not know you had. Joe shared how he sees these stories not as dusty medieval fairy tales, but as templates people still follow. He talked about the need to face your dragons, enter the dark forest, and lose parts of yourself that no longer serve you, so something stronger can grow back. Arthur, in this reading, is not a 6th century warlord. Arthur is the version of yourself that says, "This is your quest. Go get it." Archaeologists digging at Arthur's stone in Herefordshire found cremated Neolithic bones, but they belonged to people who lived thousands of years before any Arthurian knight. The University of Manchester team uncovered layers of hearths and tools and ritual pits, revealing a landscape of ancient human lives that had nothing to do with Camelot or round tables. Even so, the site became wrapped in Arthurian legend by the 13th century, as communities searching for roots and heroes layered their own needs onto the landscape. It is as if every few centuries, people reinvent Arthur's body in whatever form they need, whether it is a medieval lead cross at Glastonbury or a story about a hidden cave with a giant skeleton. Joe talked about this phenomenon too, the way myths evolve because we need them to. He pointed out how stories like Arthur's mirror the struggles and aspirations of each generation. You can see it in how Arthur becomes a medieval warrior king, then a chivalric figure of moral justice, then a symbol of lost unity in modern Britain. Every time the legend returns, it is reshaped to reflect the questions people are asking about their lives. And this is the quiet truth hidden beneath the loud headlines about Arthur's tomb being found again and again. There is no definitive grave, no single skeleton to put on display. But there is a living myth, one that people can use to frame their own challenges and transformations. The real treasure is not the body. It is the call to action that Arthur's story places in your hands. Joe's words remind us that myths hold power not because they are literally true, but because they capture something about who we want to become. You can dig up a landscape, pull out stones, and test the soil for DNA, but what you are really looking for is the part of you that can rise to the occasion, the part that can draw the sword from the stone. And if Arthur's story is a mirror, the real question is not where the body is buried. It is whether you are ready to pick up your quest. So why do these discoveries keep happening? What drives the endless search for Arthur's body? The real body found. When medieval monks at Glastonbury Abbey claimed to discover King Arthur's grave back in the 11th century, they were not just chasing ghosts. They were broke. The abbey had burned, pilgrims were not coming, and donations were drying up. Then, almost like a miracle, a grave appeared. Wooden crosses and lead plates proclaimed it Arthur's final resting place. Crowds returned, wallets in hand, and the abbey's coffers filled again. It was not fraud in their eyes. It was faith, strategy, and survival wrapped in one. Centuries later, during the Victorian fossil mania, Arthur's body appeared again, this time in whispers around caves and ancient stones, as people obsessed over relics and bones to connect themselves with a heroic past. It was a moment when Britain was reshaping its identity, building museums, rewriting myths, and pulling these legends into the light to claim them as their own. Fast forward to today, and we are still doing it. Competitor videos promising Arthur's remains rack up millions of views in days. They spike across trending pages, pushing thumbnails of swords, bones, and glowing graves, then fade as experts step in with facts. If we had a graphic on screen, it would be our hype versus evidence meter, rising when a claim hits TikTok and dropping when archaeology steps in to clarify what was actually found. And it is not just about clicks. It is about a deep, collective hunger for a hero we can touch, a story we can claim, and a piece of the past we can own. But here is a wild fact. Even if someone claimed to find Arthur's bones at Glastonbury now, they could not. In the year 1539, under Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries, the bones were lost forever. You can only find what is still buried, and Arthur's so-called grave is empty, leaving the story behind as the real treasure. And maybe that is the point. The real body we keep digging up is the myth itself, reshaped every time we need it, a mirror for whatever our culture is struggling with in that moment. Arthur's legend is not about a single burial. It is about how stories can outlive wars, kings, and even science, holding on to a quiet promise that courage and hope can rise again. So, did scientists really find King Arthur's body? Drop your thoughts below. Do you think the real treasure is the myth itself, or will someone actually find Arthur's body one day? Let's see who's team legend and who's team science in the comments.